Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking again about arms, hands and wrists, how to use them in the golf club, how to control them and whether you should be controlling them anyway. Welcome to my new indoor centre. This is going to help me get back to see you a little bit more often. A big thank you again to 24/7 Golf for setting me up with this wonderful indoor enclosure. And today is the first of many videos I'm going to be doing from in here in order to show you and explain to you a little bit more about the technical complications of this golf swing when it's a little bit too cold, damp and miserable outside to be doing it on the driving range. HACKMOTION. It's really opened a can of worms for me because it is really making me think about exactly what is going on with my arms and hands during the swing. A lot of the stuff which I was teaching in the past has always been more of kind of this chain reaction where especially the hands and the wrists have been kind of the last link in a chain and very dependent on all of the links in the chain that went before them, and to a certain extent that is still the case. However, what I want to do today is go into a little bit more depth about how the arms and the hands are working and how maybe you should be thinking about controlling and training your arms and hands to work in order to deliver the club face how you want to on the golf ball, and that is, in the most case, you want it square. So the first thing is basically to understand actually what's happening with your arms and hands when you're swinging a golf club. I think we went into it in some depth last time, but basically when you make a backswing, you are going to be lifting your arms and hands, you are going to be hinging your wrists and your trail elbow, and you are going to be pulling then the club up and over or on a plane with your shoulders at the top of your backswing. This is going to have and cause a change to the club face angle relative to the target. Every bend that you introduce into your arms, hands and wrists will have an immediate effect on the club face, both in the direction that it's pointing and also in its loft, and to a certain extent the lie as well. And I think that's probably best demonstrated if I just put this magnet pointer on the club face. You can actually see that at the address position the club face is pointing pretty straight, and then as I start to rotate away you can see that the club face starts to point, in this case, to the right side of the target. When I hinge the wrist it's opening even more, so that at the top of the golf swing the club face is pointing basically up into the sky. As I then bring the club back down, you can see how the pointer starts to rotate back towards the target, and whatever is happening with my body, my arms and my hands, I would say that for the majority of us the idea is to get back into impact position with the pointer going straight down the target line. Now this is obviously taking for granted that you're trying to hit a straight shot, that you're trying to deliver with your golf swing the club head moving straight down the target line and the club face pointing at the target. This would give you the, I suppose, the holy grail of golf shots, a straight shot. The majority of us, however, aren't doing this. We are actually delivering the club head so that it's moving either slightly to the right or slightly to the left of the target. The club face is also pointing slightly to the right or slightly to the left of the target. And the combination of these things is giving us a slight draw or a slight fade, or now and again, but more basically by good luck, a straight shot. Getting a little bit better understanding for how you're doing that and what are the main reasons for the club face, you have to understand how your arms and hands are moving and how the angles that they had at the address position are going to be changing during the swing. And this is the beauty of the HACKMOTION device. The HACKMOTION device is the first device that I've found that I can actually hit shots and get immediate feedback about how my wrists and hands are working during the swing relative to their starting position, relative to the position at the top of the golf swing, and of course the moment of impact. So what do we have to be thinking about and what is it that you should know? Well, basically, the big question is, if I start in this position, in the address position, the club face is pointing at the target, but in impact, I'm in this position, how can the club face still be pointing at the target? Because everything has changed. My hips are rotated further, my shoulders are rotated further, my hands are higher than they were in the address position. My wrist that was cupped is now bowed, talking about the lead wrist. The trail wrist is going to come back to a position where it has actually more cupping at impact than it had in the address position. And the club face should still be pointing at the target. And the fact is, it is. So how in the world are we doing this? Well, it all comes to the difference between the address position and the angles that you create in your address position and impact and the changing angles that you create during your golf swing. And this is where we're going to have to get into the future about understanding to what extent do these angles take care of themselves, and to what extent can you, could you, and should you be changing these angles or trying consciously to control them during the swing. To a greater extent, golf lessons and golf technique has been wandering away from what the arms and hands are doing and gone far more into what your body is doing. You know that all of my videos have something to do with the rotation of the body, and there's no doubt that the rotation of the body is going to have an effect on the club face. However, it's important to understand how much. So to a certain extent, we're going to be measuring 3 different changes happening with the arms and the hands and the wrists during the swing. The first one is probably the simplest one and the one that really has the least effect on face. And this is the hinging of the wrist up and down. So if you think of that in a kind of a vertical action, I think I talked about that in one of my beginners videos, is like a Scotsman drinking whiskey. It's just basically a hinging of the wrist up and down. This is what we call an ulnar deviation, and this is a radial deviation. So you've just basically got up and down. So you're going to start in the address position with a certain amount of hinging down towards the ground. And obviously, as you take the club back and hinge your wrist, that is going to go in the opposite direction. It's going to hinge up towards you. As you bring it back down, not only because of the centrifugal forces and the other forces working on gravity being one of them, you are going to get this bowing down again, which is going to actually push the grip end up, simply because there's more weight at that end of the golf club, and therefore you can almost always expect, unless you've gone into a lot of change in spine angle, for your hands to be higher in the impact position than they were in the address position. If your club has been correctly fitted, however, this means that you are going to start with the end of the club slightly in the air, and at impact it's going to be flat to the ground. So to a certain extent, that's not going to have an effect on the face angle and where the club is pointing. It will have a minimal effect, however, if you have more hinging and impact as you had in the address position. I'll get back to that in a little while. A larger change is in the so-called cupping or bowing of the wrist, extending or flexing the wrist. If you do this, you will see that in the address position, because of the way that we grip the club, and that's going to be far enough away so you can actually see this, the hand is actually not flat. It is tilted up towards you in what we call a cupping position or in extension. And if you look at this on the HACKMOTION, we can see for a neutral grip, you're going to have around about 20 degrees of cupping in the wrist in the address position. What we also see when we watch good players is that in impact, there's around about 3 to 10 degrees of bowing in the wrist. So we have a 23 to 30 degree change in where the wrist was in the address position to where the wrist is at impact. Is that a 30 degree change then in the direction that the club is pointing and in the direction that the face is pointing? At the moment, I can't tell you. But there's most certainly a change in there will be de-lofting of the golf club and rotation of the club face to, in my case, the left of target, because I'm closing the club face because of this flexion. Can I avoid the flexion? I could if I held that, and I think to a certain extent that's something, if you're trying to use the sole of the club and you're chipping the ball, for instance, that you could actually do. However, in order to get the dynamics of the swing to generate enough club head speed, I need the wrist to flex and to bow, and therefore I don't want to block this movement. So if I say there's going to be a 20 to 30 degree change in my wrist angle and eventually the same amount of change in the face angle, how am I ever going to hit the golf ball straight? Well, of course, you've got two hands on the golf club. And at the same time as you are hinging your wrist, you're hinging your trail arm and wrist as well. When you hinge your trail arm, what's actually happening is you're building here power. You're going to use this power to accelerate the club through the ball, a bit like throwing a stone on a lake. So that means that at impact, your trail arm is not going to be straight. On the contrary, you don't want it to be straight. It shouldn't be straight till after you've hit the golf ball. So if you look at the address position and the position of the trail arm, which is very slightly bent but not very much, and you look at the position of the trail arm at impact, you can see that the trail arm is bent quite considerably. The trail wrist, which is relatively flat in the address position, is tilted back at impact. So I'm going from this position to this position with the trail arm, which is opening the club face. If you look at the combination of what the trail arm's doing and what the lead arm's doing, you put them together and you've got a square club face. If you look at the three measurements in the address position, the position of your lead wrist, your trail wrist and arm, and your club face, then you will actually see a correlation between where they are in the address position and where they are in impact. And the change in the position of your lead wrist will be compensated for by the change in the position in your trail arm and your trail wrist. When we're looking at numbers in the HACKMOTION, it isn't telling us what our trail arm and trail wrist are doing at the moment because we only have sensors on the lead arm. However, it does tell us the rotation. And you can see that the rotation in impact is usually open. And it is open by the same amount as the change in the wrist angle of the lead arm. Now, I hope that's not too complicated for you to understand, but it basically means that the way that we are dynamically moving and accelerating the club head through the ball is opening the club face relative to its starting position. However, the way that the lead arm is working and hand is working, going from a cupping into a bowing position at impact, is closing the club face, and the combination means that we are square with the club face at impact. Why do you need to know this? You need to know this because your hands, more than any other part of your body, are able to contradict, fight against, or use the forces that are working on them during a swing. And I can remember a tale that Eamon Darcy told us in a pro shop when we were putting new grips on his clubs during a tournament, that he, because of his rather funky swing, was unable to change his stance and alignment and then cause his ball to fade or hook. He simply visualized it. He would stand identically to the golf ball, whether he wanted to fade the ball or draw the ball, and he simply visualized it. So something between his brain and his hands was telling his hands to open the club face, which would be more bend in the trail arm and trail wrist, more cupping in the lead arm and lead wrist. Or if he wanted to draw the ball, more bowing in the lead wrist and less bending in the trail wrist. And he was able to do that simply by visualizing a ball flight. When you swing a golf club, you are going to find it very difficult to feel or to actually see these changes. But it is something that you are going to have to practice if you want to be able to swing it like Eamon Darcy. And I'm not saying about swing it, but at least get the results that Eamon was able to achieve there. And this is really what I want to be talking about over the next few weeks and maybe months, is how are we going to get you into a position where you can actually control these movements during your golf swing. The first thing I think I'd like you to do, if you have an opportunity, is to get yourself one of these pointers. This is a simple thing you can get off the internet for about 20 bucks. It's got a magnet on and you just stick it on the front of your club. And what I want you to do then is to take your address position and actually you can see objectively now, is the club face actually aligned at the target? You should also be able to see that if you actually put your hands lower so the club head comes into the air, that it will point slightly to the left of target. Perfectly okay, because an impact, they're not going to be there. Similarly, if the club is not sitting correctly, it will be pointing to the right of target at the address position. Then I want you to basically see, as you take the club back, where the club face is pointing and how that changes if you start manipulating your wrist angles. To a certain extent, then you'll be able to see how the club is changing throughout your backswing, and as you change direction, how the club face is pointing in and through impact. So you can actually see, although my hands seem quite quiet here, that there is quite a lot of rotation happening through impact. And if again you go into the HACKMOTION device, it will see there are massive changes and massive speed in rotation through impact. That the club is sometimes changing through over 100 degrees in really milliseconds. And that's why you've got to kind of get off your high horse in this idea that you should be able to hit every golf ball straight. It's not going to happen, people, because there is just so much rotation in club face, in your body, created actively and on purpose in order to generate this club head speed that we need in order to move the ball far enough down the fairway. So you're always going to be struggling with that. The next thing is to basically get a kind of a feeling for what both your lead and your trail arm are doing during the swing. You've got to basically look at how your hand is in the address position relative to your forearm. This is what we're calling the cupping. So you'll see that if I grip the club like that, that is basically the form that I have. I want that to go into that during my golf swing. I'm going to take it up, keeping it pretty neutral, let it flatten and bow, and pull it back down and into impact. And when I say I'm pulling it down, I am not pulling the arm down. I am using the shoulder rotation to pull it back. Because if you think I have a weight here and the wrist is going in this direction, that will create the bow. And this is what I was talking about, getting this chain reaction happening. If your body is rotating, your shoulders are rotating. If your lead shoulder is rotating up and away, it's pulling the arm, and the weight of the golf club is going to help to create bowing in the wrist. If you let it, if you're holding it as if your life depends on it, you may well be blocking that lead wrist and stopping the bowing from happening. If you are not turning through the ball, you are going to cause the chicken wing and automatic cupping of the wrist through impact, and you are opening the club face. Obviously, if this starts opening and this is opening anyway, then you've got problems as far as the direction of the golf ball is going. When we're talking about your trail wrist, we're talking about taking the club back and letting basically trail elbow and trail wrist hinge back. You've heard me talk about this waiter position. This is something you've also got to actively do. It won't hinge itself. You've got to get this actively hinging back, and that will help you to flatten the lead wrist at the same time. As you start the downswing, the wrists have got to be loose enough so that the movement of the arms, and therefore the movement of the wrists, or the stump of the wrist, so to speak, in the plane of the shoulder turn will actually help you to change and close the club face, which is really out here relative to the target line, wide open. And as we come back down here, the rotation of your body, the bending and bowing of the wrists is going to help you to come back to this impact position and swing through the impact position square to the target. I know it was a very, very long and rather complicated explanation. The reason for this, it's a complicated movement. There is really no other way to understand it than to understand it, and to actually get a better understanding of what the individual joints are doing. And by doing that, you will have a far easier job of controlling these joints, and when you're practicing, not contradicting yourself. If you have a better idea of how your lead and your trail arm and hands are working through impact, I think that that is going to help you in the future to build and develop a more repetitive golf swing. And that's basically what I'm going to try and show you next time. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so, because that way you will get notifications the next time I come, and I'm going to go into a number of drills and exercises that you can do in order to get your wrists making the right kind of movements relative to the swing that you want to make. We'll also talk a little bit about swing modeling and the differences between different golf swings, and obviously the inherent differences then in what your hands and arms should be doing in order to square the club face up. Hope you enjoyed it. As ever, hit the like button if you did. Big thanks to all of the patrons out there who are supporting the channel. I shall leave a link below if you'd like.